Every day at sea, roughly 5,000 sailors wake up inside the most heavily armed object ever built by human hands. They eat breakfast, they go to work, and then they walk out onto a deck where a single misstep in any direction means being sucked into a jet intake, cut in half by a cable, moving faster than a bullet, or blown 60 feet into open ocean with a 100,000-ton ship bearing down on top of them. The Navy has a name for the place where they work. So do the sailors who survive it. Those two names are very different. And number 4 on this list is the one nobody who has served on a carrier ever fully stops thinking about. An aircraft carrier is not a ship. That label is technically correct and operationally useless. A Nimitz-class carrier stretches over 1,000 feet in length, displaces nearly 100,000 tons of seawater, and houses more aircraft than most nations field in their entire air forces. On any given day at sea, 5,000 men and women live, sleep, eat, and work aboard what amounts to a floating city armed with nuclear reactors, jet fuel, and live ordnance, all of it in constant motion on an unpredictable ocean. The flight deck alone spans 4.5 acres. During active operations, dozens of aircraft weighing tens of thousands of pounds each are launched, recovered, refueled, rearmed, and repositioned, sometimes simultaneously, in a choreography so complex that one former pilot compared it to a ballet performed inside a tornado. The men and women on that deck are separated from the difference between a routine day and a catastrophe by tolerance margins measured in inches. What follows are the 7 most dangerous things that can happen on an aircraft carrier at sea. Not ranked by drama, ranked by what the data actually shows. Danger number 1: flight deck fire and ordnance chain reaction. At 10:51 on the morning of July 29, 1967, an electrical surge aboard USS Forrestal sent a charge through the circuitry of a Zuni unguided rocket mounted beneath an F-4 Phantom parked on the aft flight deck. The Zuni fired. It crossed 100 feet of deck, severed a crewman's arm, and ruptured the external fuel tank of an A-4 Skyhawk being prepared for launch. The fuel, 400 gallons of JP-5 jet fuel, hit the deck and ignited in seconds. What happened next is one of the most studied disasters in United States naval history. Within 5 minutes, 9 major explosions tore through the aft deck. Cannon shells cooked off and raked the deck in every direction. Ejection seats in burning aircraft activated spontaneously, firing with no one in them. 40,000 gallons of leaked jet fuel flooded 3 decks below through a breach in the flight deck. The specialized firefighting team assigned to the deck, Damage Control Team 8, led by Chief Gerald Ferrier, was killed in the initial explosion. Ferrier had sprinted to the burning aircraft without protective gear, fire extinguisher in hand, and smothered the first bomb with suppressant foam in an attempt to buy the pilots time to escape. He was standing over it when it detonated. 134 sailors died, 161 were injured, 21 aircraft were destroyed. Damage to the ship exceeded $72 million, the equivalent of more than $500 million in today's money. Among the survivors was a young Navy lieutenant commander named John McCain, who would later become a United States Senator. Among the dead were the men who had been following procedures that Navy investigators later found had been deliberately bypassed 4 weeks earlier to speed up flight operations. The Forrestal fire did not happen because the Navy was careless. It happened because at a certain scale of complexity, the margin for error collapses towards zero. And on a carrier deck loaded with bombs, bullets, jet fuel, and 5,000 pounds of rocket propellant, zero margin means everything that can go wrong goes wrong at once. If the history buried inside operations like this is something you want more of, 2 seconds on the like button makes a significant difference in how many people find this channel. Danger number 2. Catapult launch failure. A steam catapult on a Nimitz-class carrier is not a piece of equipment. It is a controlled explosion repeated dozens of times a day. The system uses pressurized steam stored in large accumulators beneath the flight deck to drive a piston through 2 parallel cylinders, each running the length of a football field at violent speed. A shuttle attached to the nose gear of the aircraft connects to that piston. When the catapult fires, a 45,000-pound aircraft, roughly the weight of 4 fully loaded school buses, accelerates from 0 to 165 miles per hour in approximately 2 seconds. The physics of that moment are extraordinary. The catapult officer controls the steam pressure precisely for each aircraft based on its weight and the deck wind conditions. Too little pressure, and the aircraft does not reach flying speed before it runs out of deck. It goes over the bow and into the ocean. Too much pressure, and the sudden force snaps the nose gear off the aircraft. The margin between those 2 outcomes is a matter of precise calibration performed under pressure by sailors in their 20s working in noise levels measured above 146 decibels, louder than a military jet at full throttle standing 10 feet away. A failed catapult shot is not simply an accident, it is a multi-element cascade. A pilot who does not achieve flying speed at the end of the stroke has approximately 1 second to decide between ejection and ditching. Ejecting at deck level at high speed, with the carrier hull moving at 30 knots directly behind the aircraft, gives a pilot a narrow and unforgiving window. The sea ahead is the better outcome. The propellers of the carrier behind the aircraft are the catastrophic one. The catapult is fired nearly 10,000 times per deployment. The system achieves a 99.5% operational availability rate. That remaining half of 1% across the history of carrier aviation represents a body count. Danger number 3. The arresting wire snap. Every aircraft that lands on a carrier is, in engineering terms, attempting a controlled crash. A fighter coming in for recovery travels at approximately 150 miles per hour. It deploys a tailhook, a steel hook bolted to an 8-foot bar beneath the aircraft's tail, and aims to catch one of 3 or 4 steel cables stretched across the deck at 20-foot intervals. When the hook catches a wire, the aircraft goes from 150 miles per hour to 0 in roughly 2 seconds across 320 feet. That deceleration force loads onto a 1.5-inch wire rope that must absorb 47.5 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy in an instant. When those wires fail, the results are immediate and catastrophic. On December 3, 1981, aboard USS John F. Kennedy in the Caribbean Sea, an arresting cable snapped as an A-7 Corsair attempted recovery. The cable struck the deck at full recoil velocity, killing 2 sailors outright, Airman Apprentice Anthony Davis and Petty Officer 3rd Class Robert Bauman, and seriously injuring a 3rd. The Navy has recorded 3 arresting gear-related deaths and 12 major injuries since 1980 alone from cable failures. On March 18, 2016, aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the number 4 cross-deck cable failed during an E-2C Hawkeye landing. The improperly calibrated arresting engine transferred its full load to the cable, which parted and whipped across the deck at the speed of a cracking bullwhip. 8 sailors sustained injuries ranging from cuts and bruises to a fractured skull, broken limbs, dislocated hips, and a severed blood vessel that nearly cost 1 sailor his foot. The Hawkeye itself went nose down over the bow, disappearing below the deck line for 4 seconds before the pilots managed to pull it back into the air, its hull covered in seawater from how close it came to the ocean. A snapped arresting wire weighing 750 pounds and moving at the velocity of a weapon does not discriminate. No color-coded flight deck vest, no situational awareness, and no amount of training provides meaningful protection from 150 feet of steel cable moving faster than the human eye can track. Danger number 4: jet blast, prop wash, and FOD. Written in giant yellow letters on the side of the island, the carrier's control tower, are 2 words that every sailor learns before their first day on the flight deck: beware jets. The instruction is not symbolic. During flight operations, a carrier maintains approximately 30 knots of wind across the deck to assist aircraft takeoff. The exhaust from a jet engine at full military power extends in a cone of superheated air at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A sailor who walks into that cone without warning does not stumble. They are thrown. In 1965, airman apprentice Barry Peterman was blown off the deck of USS Enterprise by jet exhaust. His body was never recovered. In 1988, 2 sailors died aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt in the same deployment, one blown into the ocean by jet blast, one who walked into the spinning propeller of a transport aircraft. A human body against a rotating prop is not a survivable encounter. In 1991, Petty Officer J.D. Bridges survived being partially sucked into the intake of an A-6 intruder, wedged inside the intake duct before reaching the spinning compressor blades, only because the pilots shut down the engine within seconds of the event. The noise environment that surrounds all of this is itself a form of hazard. Measured studies of U.S. Navy aircraft carrier flight decks by the Naval Safety Center found noise from aircraft engines at various locations on the deck ranging from 138 to more than 146 decibels. The threshold for immediate hearing damage is 140 decibels. Flight deck personnel on aircraft carriers have been exposed to a time-weighted average of 109 decibels over an average 11.5-hour working day. The Navy's own research found that 38% of flight deck personnel demonstrate measurable permanent hearing loss, compared to 11% for administrative personnel working on the same ship. The danger zone is literal. It is also silent in a way that matters most. By the time you know something is wrong, you can no longer hear it coming. Danger number 5: man overboard. The flight deck of a Nimitz-class carrier stands between 50 and 60 feet above the waterline, roughly the height of a 6-story building. Falling from that height into the ocean at sea is not simply a matter of surviving the impact. At 60 feet, a human body strikes water with sufficient force to fracture multiple bones. The ship itself, moving at 30 knots, passes the fall point in seconds. The carrier's propellers generate a suction field that pulls anything in the water toward the hull. A man overboard event from a flight deck is not an accident with a high survival rate. A 50-year analysis of U.S. Navy mishaps published in a peer-reviewed trauma surgery journal found that blunt injury associated with man overboard events accounted for 259 casualties, with a 46.3% mortality rate. Nearly half of everyone who goes over the side of a carrier at sea does not come back. The U.S. Navy response protocol is immediate. A life ring is thrown, the direction of fall is called out across the ship's communications, and the carrier initiates a course correction to attempt to return to the position of the fallen sailor. A rescue helicopter assigned specifically to plane guard duty maintains hover position during all flight operations. Despite this, the search window is brutal. In the open ocean at night, in heavy weather, a single human figure in the water is nearly impossible to locate. The deck is 60 feet up. The ocean covers 3/4 of the planet. The gap between those two facts is where people die. Danger number 6, heavy weather and deck motion. An aircraft carrier has 6 degrees of freedom in the ocean. It surges forward and backward along its length. It sways laterally. It heaves up and down on the vertical axis. It pitches bow up, bow down, around the transverse axis. It rolls side to side, and it yaws, rotating left and right around the vertical center. All 6 of those motions occur simultaneously in heavy weather. The job of every aircraft attempting recovery in those conditions is to land on a moving, pitching, rolling 60-foot wide strip of steel that is itself generating wind, while traveling at 150 miles per hour at night over open ocean. In July 2022, heavy weather in the Mediterranean Sea caused a chained-down FA-18 Super Hornet assigned to USS Harry S. Truman to break free and go overboard. The Navy eventually located and recovered the aircraft from 9,500 feet below the ocean surface. In January 2022, an F-35C Lightning II, one of the most expensive fighter aircraft ever built, valued at approximately $100 million, crashed attempting to land on USS Carl Vinson in the South China Sea, injuring 7 sailors on the flight deck before falling over, the side in flames. The pilot ejected and was recovered by the plane guard helicopter that is always orbiting during flight operations for exactly this purpose. Weather does not shut down carrier flight operations the way it grounds civilian airports. Carriers are expected to operate in sea states that would halt almost any other form of aviation. The consequence of that expectation is a set of risk tolerances that would be considered extraordinary anywhere else and ordinary here. Danger number 7, ordnance misfire and accidental weapon discharge. On November 30th, 1988, a 20mm cannon on an A-7 Corsair accidentally fired during maintenance aboard USS Nimitz in the Arabian Sea. The cannon rounds ignited 6 adjacent aircraft. 1 sailor was killed in the initial explosion. A second sailor, who suffered burns over 90% of his body, was medically evacuated to Germany and died from his injuries. The Nimitz continued flight operations that day. This category of danger is distinct from fire because the initiating event is a system that is working exactly as designed, a weapon, activated in a context where no weapon should be active. Carriers at sea are surrounded by ordnance. Bombs are staged on the hangar deck. Missiles are mounted on aircraft parked on the flight deck. Cannon ammunition sits in feeds connected to loaded guns aboard aircraft that are being maintained, repositioned, and inspected around the clock. The operational tempo of a deployed carrier strike group means that ordnance is never more than a few feet from a heat source, a fuel line, or a human body. The USS Oriskany fire of October 26, 1966, killed 44 sailors and injured 156 when a magnesium flare ignited in a storage locker. Magnesium burns at over 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit and cannot be extinguished with water. Water accelerates the reaction. 44 men died in an enclosed space because a single flare, the size a person could hold in one hand, was placed where it should not have been. Metals like magnesium and phosphorus used in military ordnance combust into what are classified as Delta-class fires, fires that require specialized suppressants and that conventional shipboard firefighting equipment cannot stop. Every person who steps onto that deck knows exactly what surrounds them. They know the cable can snap. They know the exhaust behind the aircraft they are walking past is hot enough to melt steel. They go up there anyway, every 6 hours, in the dark, in the weather, for months at a time. The question is a simple one, but nobody in the Navy will answer it on record. At what point does the operational value of a carrier strike group stop justifying what it costs the people who keep it flying? Drop your answer below. If this kind of operational history is what you're here for, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and make sure you don't miss what's coming next.